Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Etwinning National Conference 2021. My name is John Tate.
Hi everyone, and my name is Ciara Gibbons. John and I are the two Etwinning officers here at Lergus. So thank you all for joining us this morning.
You're very welcome on this Saturday morning, and thank you for giving up your time. The theme of today's conference is Media Literacy and Disinformation, and this is the overall theme for Etwinning for 2021. We feel it's a very important topic, particularly during these challenging times. And we've brought together some of the leading experts in the field today. We hope you get a lot out of it and something to bring back to your classrooms and beyond.
Great, so I'll just run through a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. I'll just talk you through the schedule for today. So in a moment, you'll be hearing from our keynote speaker, Dr. Eileen Cullity. And then shortly after 10, there'll be a launch of our Etwinning Evaluation report. Our Strategic Initiatives Manager, Emma Granger at Lergus, will launch this. And then that brings us to a 15-minute break. And when we come back, we'll have a panel discussion on media literacy and disinformation. And that will be chaired by Martina Chapman of Media Literacy Ireland. Then we'll take a second 15-minute break, after which you'll join the workshop that you chose when you first registered. So that will either be with CyberSafe Kids, WebWise, or News Brands Ireland. And just to mention that all the activities in the main room are being recorded. However, your workshop sessions won't be recorded. So we are delighted to have with us today Dr. Eileen Cullity. Eileen is a postdoctoral researcher at the DCU Institute for Media, Democracy and Society. This is where she leads research on countering disinformation, and her book called Disinformation and Manipulation in Digital Media has just been published. Eileen also leads a Broadcasting Authority of Ireland project investigating the diversity of public service media during COVID-19. So I'll pass you over now to Dr. Eileen Cullity for her keynote address.
Hello everyone, I'm Eileen Cullity from Dublin City University, and I was really delighted to be asked to deliver this keynote address because I believe what I have to say around disinformation and media literacy really resonates with the eTwinnings program and the program that they've put together today. So I guess if the presentation comes up, we can go straight into it. So the title of the talk is Media Literacy, Putting Out Digital Fires / Building a Better Future. And by digital wildfires, I mean all those interconnected problems that we talk about so much with digital media, whether it's disinformation, hate speech, harassment, online bullying. So these are all these crises that we feel like we're in. We don't feel like we're in, we are in, and we're looking for solutions to try and put them out. And there's growing interest in and funding for media literacy as a response to these problems. And increased support for media literacy is a good thing in itself. But if we just view it purely as being a solution, as putting out the fire, that can be quite limiting. And in contrast to that, I want to present this bigger ambition for what media literacy is and for what media literacy can offer to students. And that's about empowering them to live full digital lives and building that better future online. And hopefully that will be clear towards the end of the talk. So I've loosely structured it into kind of three topics. So first I'll talk about disinformation, then about the digital media more generally and how we ended up where we are, and then finally the role of media literacy in all of this. And just a quick note on language. I'm using the terms disinformation and media literacy in a very broad catch-all sense. I know in some of the workshops you'll be doing later, you'll hear distinctions between disinformation and misinformation and so on. And just to make life easy and coherent, I'm just going to use these catch-all terms instead. So for a little background on where I'm coming from, for the past few years, I've been working on various projects in and around disinformation, and you can see some of the main projects listed here. And each of these addresses a different aspect of the problem. So for example, the first project there is working with computer scientists to develop new tools that would help people evaluate content online, whereas the last project is with the National Media Regulator, where we're trying to evaluate what the platforms are doing or claim they are doing to counter disinformation. And really the important thing, or to me the most notable thing about all of these projects, is how collaborative they are. that they involve working with people from other research disciplines, with journalists, with librarians, with teachers. You have to go out and engage with all of these different sectors. And that's because disinformation really is a whole of society problem. And if we're going to make any progress, it is going to be through collaborations and innovative programs and things like e-twinnings as well. So arising from all of this research and engagement, I've made some observations about the nature of disinformation as a problem. And these set the scene for what I want to say about media literacy and how it fits into addressing it. So the first thing is that disinformation is a really complex problem. There are just so many different factors to consider. Some aspects of it are psychological, some aspects are social and political. And then, of course, there's the technological and the media elements. And it's really difficult to see how all of these things fit together. And it's almost impossible for one person or one project to ever address all of these things. And that's why the collaboration is so important. A second point is that it's not a new problem. Lies, rumors, manipulation, these have always been with us. There have always been periods of mass panic and conspiracy theories and frenzies. So none of this is new, but it does have new dynamics, because what's changed, of course, is the media environment. With the internet and social media, false information can just spread so much faster and so much further than they ever did before. And also it's participatory by nature. So before the web, if there was conspiracy theory panics, say in the US, as there were in the late 80s, early 90s, they didn't really travel here. We might have heard some news about them after the fact, but they didn't travel here en masse, and people couldn't join in and be part of it. Now those things are here instantly, and Irish people can join the campaign, they can join the Facebook groups, and they become really active and involved. And that's what's really changed. It's the dynamics of it. And then finally, the problem is just not well understood yet, partly because the research area is quite new, and partly because it keeps changing. A few years ago, the big concern was about foreign interference in elections. No one could have foreseen what would happen with COVID. And now what we're concerned about are the prevalence of all these conspiracy groups and people who no longer trust authorities. So the whole nature of the problem keeps changing, and that makes it very difficult to pin it down. So arising from all of that, there are just no simple solutions to the disinformation problem. And we should be very wary of anybody who suggests that there are. And media literacy is not a solution to the disinformation problem. And that's okay, because media literacy is really important in its own right. And it brings benefits that extend far beyond addressing disinformation or any of the other digital wildfires that I mentioned. Now, by saying all of that, I don't mean that media literacy is not an important contribution to combating disinformation. It absolutely is. But we should just be realistic about what it can achieve, what we want to get from media literacy, and what we want students to take from media literacy. So if we focus for a little bit on disinformation itself and what we do know about it. So there are lots of studies that try and identify what are the factors that make people susceptible to disinformation and false claims. And you can see some of the key points listed here. I'll just describe them quite briefly. But the key point is that these are not, there's no formula to say in what circumstances or what characteristics will lead somebody to believe disinformation. It's all highly contextual. So the points listed here, they're just trends and tendencies. But the first is cognitive capacity. So this is about a person's ability to reason something out. Maybe if a person doesn't have the intellectual capacity to understand and evaluate a piece of information, well, then they're more likely to believe false claims. But that's quite a simplistic starting point, because a lot of this has a strong situational dimension. It's not simply about intelligence. For example, when people are tired, if they're stressed, if they're distracted, well, then they're less likely to think critically about the content and the information they're coming across. And of course, on social media, the entire platforms are designed for distraction, to keep us constantly scrolling through content, checking on the next thing without fully paying attention to it. So regardless of anything to do with intelligence, any of us in any situation can have this low cognitive capacity that makes us more susceptible to false claims. Motivated reasoning is a fancy way of describing biased thinking. So it's the tendency to accept information that we agree with and to reject any information that we disagree with. And all of us are susceptible to this. Another important issue is just prior knowledge. So when people have a low level of knowledge about a topic, then they're far more likely to believe false claims about it. If you think about immigration, which is the classic example, across countries, the vast majority of people have a very poor level of knowledge about how much migration is, how many migrants are coming into the country, how many migrants live in the country. And because they massively overestimate the number of migrants, they tend to view it as a major problem when the evidence says otherwise. And then when they come across misinformation about migration, they don't have the background knowledge to reject it. You could say the same thing about most scientific disinformation. If people don't have the background knowledge, then it's just much harder for them to spot false claims. And then repeated exposure is an important factor because this says, regardless of intelligence, regardless of knowledge and everything else, if you're just constantly hearing a false claim over and over, after a while, it can take on an air of truth. It can seem like there's some credence to it. And this is important because it means we should try and reduce the overall visibility of false claims. And then finally, of course, there's this whole range of issues around literacies, not just media literacy, it's digital literacy, information literacy, also basic numeracy, understanding of data, understanding of online technology. And the problem here, I think, is that when we talk about these literacies and all of the literacies, is that it places a huge burden on individuals. They're asked to make judgments about contents in settings that were designed to override those judgments. They're expected to upskill and learn all of these new skills. And that, we have to be realistic about the people's capabilities of suddenly adapting to all of these things. So as I mentioned, these are just broad tendencies that specific scenarios of disinformation will vary a lot. So if you think about vaccines, which has been in the news a lot, unfortunately, for the past year, while we know that older people tend to be more susceptible to disinformation, that's linked to the fact that they have lower levels of digital and media literacy. Then also, as you age, there's elements of cognitive decline. But when it comes to disinformation about COVID-19, younger people tend to believe it more than older people. And one reason for that might be just the very nature of COVID-19, because it had a bigger health impact on older people. They were paying more attention. They were more knowledgeable about the nature of the virus, whereas younger people may not have been paying attention as much. So when they were asked, do antibiotics prevent COVID-19, they were more likely to say yes. We also see this with vaccines, where older people tend to be more accepting of vaccines than younger people. And some people suggest that this is simply due to experience, where younger people have not seen the devastating consequences of diseases for which vaccines have been developed. So it's very contextual. Another thing that's important to think about is that the reasons people engage with disinformation don't necessarily mean that they believe it. Often we hear news media reports that tell us how many times a piece of disinformation has been viewed or shared. That doesn't really tell us anything about whether people believe it or not. So research suggests that people share disinformation and view it for loads of different reasons. They want to inform others. They want to express their own opinion. They just find it funny or entertaining. And the last reason is a really important one. It's that they want to warn other people. It's a good instinct to talk to other people. If you remember the Momo challenge from a few years ago, so this was a hoax saying that an online video was encouraging children to self-harm. So when a video like that appears, it's really not surprising that people's first instinct is to share it, just in case it is true. And it doesn't mean that all the people who shared it actually believed it. I think what's examples like this indicate is that people's instincts are actually quite good. They're pro-social. So the question then is, how can we encourage them to have better practices around information? Fortunately, the research suggests that you can counteract disinformation. You can use fact checks and corrections. You can encourage people to just slow down and stop and think about the message they're consuming. And this is the basis of the Be Media Smart campaign that's currently running by Media Literacy Ireland. It asks people to just stop, think, and check that the information they're consuming is accurate. And the third thing that seems to work is pre-warning people about manipulation strategies. So telling them in advance, this is how people try to manipulate you. And here you can see an example of that. It's called the bad news game, where people are encouraged to become their own master of disinformation and to create bots and to manipulate others. And the idea is that by learning how easy it is to do that, then you're more aware of it yourself. So these digital wildfires that I mentioned, the previous slides where I focused on disinformation could just as easily have been about bullying, harassment, hate speech. And it seems like that when it comes to digital media, we're locked into a cycle of reacting to these digital problems. And while we need to react to problems, we also need to ask bigger questions about how can we set foundations for a positive future online. So I think media literacy has a key role, not just in putting out that digital fire, but also in building up the positive side of that project. And that's possible because the web itself is only 30 years old. We're in our infancy of this new technology, and we can play a key role in shaping how it develops for future generations. So to think about that, I want to just draw a parallel with the development of broadcasting over 100 years ago. When broadcasting came along, so first radio and later television, in Europe specifically, there was a clear recognition that this new technology could serve the public good, but that the public good would not emerge from private companies selling advertising. And that's why public service broadcasting was initiated. And famously, the BBC promised to inform, educate, and entertain the public. And that established a model whereby, for example, educational and creative programming for children, things like Blue Peter, which began in the 1950s in the UK, or later Sesame Street in the US. These were specifically designed to be spaces where children were not being sold products and where teachers and educational specialists informed the programming. And we saw a return to this here in Ireland last year when RTE collaborated with Mary Immaculate College to deliver the Homeschool Hub. Now, I'm not saying TV or public broadcasting is perfect, far from it. The point here is that when a new technology came along, governments regulated it to know that if there wasn't structures put in place and obligations put in place, nobody would just decide to serve the public interest. And if we contrast that with the 1990s and the development of the web, the policy approach was very specifically to not regulate so that business could flourish. And the result of that is that we have these enormous companies that are hugely successful, and they are basically advertising companies. That's what Google and Facebook are. And these are the two platforms. So Google owns YouTube, Facebook owns Instagram and WhatsApp, and is about planning to launch Instagram for kids. These are the platforms that dominate young people's lives. So Sarah Arnold from Maynooth University finds that when children start consuming media, it's on YouTube. That's where they go straight to. And this is an advertising company. And because it's an advertising company, it is designed for what they call engagement. So that's the infinite scrolling through content, the constant recommendations and push notifications, so that if you do put down your phone, there's little beeps reminding you to come back. None of it is designed to actually process information. It's designed for these instant reactions. And built into all of that is just harvesting data to feed their advertising businesses. And these platforms are quite clear about it, that they're advertising companies. And we know from leaked memos that they are fully aware of the destructive nature of their design choices. And they don't do anything about it because those design choices are profitable. Now, there's another consequence of this shift to digital media, which is absolutely not to eulogize the past mass media. That certainly had its problems too. But what we've seen with this shift is just the socialization around technology and the way young people do not get to maybe engage or have a space to talk about their media use in a way we did when we had a more communal space. So if you think about news, for example, which I know one of your workshops later is on news. In the past, you would have learnt the value of news. No one had to tell you that news is an important thing. You assimilated that quite naturally from your parents telling you to be quiet because the news is on, or from seeing your teachers come to school with the newspaper. Now, the parents and teachers might still be consuming the news, but they're probably doing it on a device that looks exactly the same as any other device. So they could be doing anything. So news is not differentiated from all these other types of content. Similarly, when you think about content aimed for children, you know, as a child growing up in a mass media age, you were probably consuming that while your parents or grandparents or siblings were also in the room. They could comment on what you were watching. You could ask them questions. On the flip side, when adults were watching their programs, children were in the room too, and the adults could regulate what was appropriate. They could provide some background. But in this alone together world of consumption, we have young people consuming media without that kind of context around where they can ask questions, where an adult can jump in and say or comment on the appropriateness or just even provide some instruction or insight onto what they're doing. And that socialization, I think, is a crucial shift that underpins a lot of these other problems that we are talking about. So it's in that context that I think media literacy in schools and in education generally is serving two goals. There's that traditional idea of teaching people to evaluate, analyze and produce messages, but also it's about creating this space where people can talk about the media they're consuming, become empowered to express themselves and develop capacities to think about the relationship between media and civic life. So Paul Meuhalidus is a media literacy specialist, and he writes about how media literacy education for young people is about preparing children and young adults for lives of active inquiry around media and understanding the ties between information, community, and democracy. So it's about much more than helping young people become good consumers and creators of media, and that's important too, but it's also about empowering them to live full lives and engage with the world around them. And so the traditional concept of media literacy emphasizes the importance of the role of media in society and developing those key skills, and that remains essential. But in the digital age, this civic issue, or this citizenship component, is really important too. These are embedded in Meuhalidus's 5 A's of media literacy, which is kind of an updating of the traditional media literacy curriculum. And note here the emphasis on appreciating and helping people recognize the value of civil dialogue and respect for diversity of opinion. So many of the problems we talk about are freedom of expression, incivility online, where people do not know how to disagree with others in a civil way. That's a media literacy skill. And related to that, he talks about action, helping people see that when they are concerned about an issue, they have a path to action. They can actually do something. It's not just about consuming content, when all the media you engage with is also tied into the way we live, our social structures and our political structures. So some of you may be familiar with this already, but it's a project from TU Dublin. So it's not a project I've any engagement with. And I should thank Kate Shanahan from TU Dublin for sending me the quotes and the images used here. But I think it's a really great example of a project that demonstrates how media literacy can create this space for young people to think about media and to understand how media helps them develop as both citizens and those good consumers. So the project was originally developed for DEIS schools. And the basic idea is that TU Dublin's journalism students write news articles for the Click website, and the school children get to read, comment, and discuss those articles. So multiple literacy goals are combined here. The children get to engage with news and current affairs and learn about news literacy and media literacy, but they're also participating in comments and civic discussion. So when they post a comment, if their comments are, the teachers correct their grammar, or they're encourage them to express themselves more fluidly, so it's basic literacy. but also if they're post comments that are maybe aggressive or uncivil, then the teachers step in, or the people managing the comments step in and encourage them, to rewrite that in a more suitable way. So that's learning to participate, which I think is a really key skill. So you can see here some of the comments from children who've participated, and what it's clear is that this is not about pedantic instruction on learning to be media literate. It's a space of meaningful engagement with news. It's a space where they can be creative and they can write stories and see them published, and know that students in the university have read and edited their stories. And it's also a space for this respectful participation in an online space. One of my favorite examples from it was a child who was outraged because he read a sports article that criticized his own team, and he said, "Call yourself a journalist. You should be ashamed of yourself." And I think it's brilliant because we all know that feeling, and we've all seen that comment posted over and over. And you just imagine what a great learning experience a comment like that is, when you, as an opportunity to talk about managing emotion, of taking that step back and go, well, is it fair to attack the journalist? Has he actually written anything wrong? Or is that your motivated reasoning and your investment and your bias towards your own team that's leading you to make these comments? And we're surrounded by adults who don't understand these nuances. So I think it is just incredible that children at a young age through this program are having these discussions. Also, for the teachers, you can see how they describe the multiple literacies that are being developed, that children are becoming more confident to express themselves, that they're having debates, that they're asking questions, and none of it is dumbed down. They're talking about major issues that are dominating the news today. And then the teachers in particular highlighted that it was useful for students that were struggling in school, that they were able to embrace this as a space to express their opinions. And whatever about a student's ability, this idea that you're empowering young people to express themselves, I think, is just core to what we want to build for a positive future. And then finally, the journalism students themselves described it as a rewarding experience that helps them reflect on their future profession. And I think it's really striking to me that you have these different sectors coming together here, and different age groups coming together, all working on this common goal, and all learning and taking value from it. And I think that's the type of collaboration that we need for building that positive future. So to conclude then, and coming back to this title, I think initiatives like Click News or Etwinnings or Media Literacy Ireland, they exemplify the value of bringing people together from different sectors to collaborate, to try out ideas. But those digital wildfires, the cyberbullying, the disinformation, the online harassment, they will not be put out by media literacy alone. That job requires commitment from policymakers and a range of other actors. It requires people who actually want to change the design of online spaces and put obligations on those big platforms that dominate our lives. But in the meantime, teaching young people to analyze, evaluate sources, it will help. It is a positive contribution. But media literacy can also pursue a more radical project, and that's to build this better digital future. And the description that I've written here, it might sound idealistic, creating inclusive spaces for reflection and self-expression, developing capacities to engage in civil life in meaningful and responsible ways. But actually, if you think about that Click News project, that sounds a lot like this description here. So it is possible to carve out these spaces online where young people are not expected to shoulder the burden of putting out fires, but instead they're being offered this positive experience to develop their voice, to use their creativity, and to engage with the world around them. So I think that's why we need to be realistic about what media literacy can achieve, and we also need to look at it in a positive way of making positive contributions to the lives of young people and ultimately to society and to future. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Eileen, for those really informative and inspiring words. For those who would like to read it further on Eileen's insights and work, I've just posted a link to her book, which she has co-authored with Jane Stuter. The book is Disinformation and Manipulation in Digital Media. So in the chat on your right-hand side of your screen there, you'll see a link that I've posted there. So do check that out. It's there's some really great work there from Eileen, and thank her so much for contribution today. So now we're going to take a few moments to inform you about a piece of work that we are launching today. And to speak further about this, I'd like to hand over to Emma Granger, who is the manager of the Strategic Initiatives Unit in Lagos. So over to you, Emma.
Hi there. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Oh, sorry, my slides just jumped ahead. Very nice to be with you all this morning and launching this report. As you can see, it's an evaluation report of Etwinning that we're launching today. Unfortunately, I can't claim to have been the researcher of this report or the author. That was Vanna Darcy, who is with the University of Limerick. She's the EU Partnerships Officer there. And previous to that has worked on European programmes both in Lagos and outside of it too. So unfortunately she can't be with us today to discuss in detail the findings and recommendations. But we did want to draw attention to it today of its publication, and I believe John will or somebody will put a link in the chat so you'll have access to that too, as well as the previous piece. So really all I wanted to talk through today was just the rationale for the evaluation, sort of why we went about it, the process of it happening, and some of the key findings and the next steps that we're going to look at. So some of you, or many of you who are experiencing Etwinning, might be aware that Etwinning has been around since 2005. So this year is its sweet 16th birthday. So it's not exactly in its infancy, as Eileen was saying about the internet. If 30 is not in the infancy anymore, then or still in infancy, then so is 15. But we also, I suppose, feel because it's still growing, it hasn't reached its full potential, and there's still lots for us to learn about it happening. So at this point of it being a teenager in Ireland, at least, we thought it'd be a good time for some self-reflection. And I suppose over the years, we could take it that it's all very positive. We've seen a rise in terms of the metrics, the registrations on the site, the projects that are registered on the site each year. So even with an example like that, we know that from 2005 up to now, the number of projects that are registered each year has more than tripled. We've around 200 to 250 projects happening in the last couple of years each year. So the evaluation will, of course, it references that growth, but we wanted to look beyond that really to what's behind that, and to the service that we offer to the users of Etwinning, and maybe potential users down the line. So just a little bit more detail there. So I suppose also part of the rationale was that we know that there's much more capacity within the site for greater use of the platform within schools across Ireland. But we also know, I suppose, in the number of years that we've been working on it, informally even, that there are some hesitations, some obstacles, some things for people to get around. So we wanted to look at some of these considerations, how they've impacted on people using the platform, and how they might be gotten around for future users. So like I say, the evaluation itself goes right back to the birth of Etwinning, and it looks at various iterations over the years. It's the first in-depth look at national level. Obviously, it's been part of larger evaluations at European level. It's been subject to all kinds of factual checks and audit checks. But this is the first time we as a National Support Office have really examined the platform in an Irish context, and our efficacy, I suppose, as a support office for Etwinning. So the process itself, as you can see there, began in December 2019. And we thought we'd have it all nicely wrapped up in the last 2 terms of that academic year. But we all know what happened in March of that year. So we had a little bit of protraction in the report. But having said that, we still had around 150 responses to the 2 surveys, and around 50 people interviewed as part of it. So through a difficult year, we still had a lot of engagement from the Etwinning community. So we're really, really thankful for that. And it's led to a very rich report. Just move on to the... Sorry. Oh, they're coming in one by one. So the evaluation itself examines... the levels of engagement with Etwinning. So like I said, beyond, I suppose, the number of registrations, but more so, what are people logging in for? What's the purpose behind it? How often are they actively engaged in it? It looks at the relevance of Etwinning, both to people who would have signed up, way back at the beginning, if they've dropped off, why, and more recent users, why they signed up. And if it's the relevance of that, it looks at the support offered by ourselves in the National Support Office, looking at the barriers to participation for some users, and the motivation factors for using Etwinning, and overall, I suppose, how any of these needs can be addressed. So the report itself, the aims and objectives were those ones that are listed there, and the key findings are broken down under each of those headings. So obviously I won't go into each and all of them now, but I suppose some particularly significant ones I can draw your attention to. And I just created, these are some of the key words in a little Wordle, which I know a lot of teachers will be familiar with. So on the key findings, I suppose, there were three major themes. One was the need for recognition of the work involved in Etwinning and the continuous professional development, the need for easier integration of Etwinning across an individual school, so a whole school approach, and finally the greater embedding of Etwinning across schools nationally. Which somewhat circles back to that first point, because we know that with greater recognition of the work, that might lead to more schools taking up the opportunities within Etwinning. So they were kind of the three overarching findings. There were some more practical findings and recommendations. So suggestions like templates for new users, examples of curriculum embedded projects, and the setting up of thematic clusters. And they're ones that we can start work on immediately. And kind of have been there in the background, but we're going to kind of draw up and draw more attention to for especially new users who are looking for those. And I suppose when looking at the obstacles as well, like two of the keywords that came up, which won't be a surprise to anyone who's involved in education or in school, one of them being time. And I suppose the other one being technology, which is just a fact of working on Etwinning. And with those findings, I suppose our attempts are going to be to try and mitigate one with the other to a certain extent. Obviously, we can't provide more time to a teacher in the day, or more time for schools to work on these projects. But what we can do is provide as much assistance as possible with the technology, and in that way attempt to ease some of the technological burden. So that shouldn't slow down any projects getting up and running. So with every project that's registered on the Etwinning site, there's the offer of an on-site, currently virtual visit with one of our Etwinning officers, just for teachers to go through any issues that they're facing or that they feel they might stumble on to get their project up and running. So in that way, to try and help with the time. And I suppose there are larger recommendations within the report that we need to look at in terms of future work plans. So we're really, really glad to have the feedback from users to be able to shape our future work plans around this guide. So the next steps, I think it says, the next steps that we've already begun are implementing those recommendations. Again, looking at our existing work plan and where we can make amendments to implement some of the recommendations, and for future work plans also. A piece that was coming up, or another kind of strong message that was coming through that teachers wanted to talk about, was the impact of these projects on themselves as teachers, their own professional development, their students, and the schools. And we felt like that was such a sort of recurring theme, but not exactly what we were setting out to look at in the evaluation, that we actually felt like it warrants its own separate study now. So that's going to be a separate piece of work that we're going to pull out to actually look at the impact taking part in Etwinning projects and being a member of the Etwinning community actually brings to schools and teachers. Yeah, so that's the next study. So all that's left for me to say really is to thank very, very much the participants who took part in what was an exceptionally difficult year in schools. We still had a great representation from our schools that are involved. To thank the researcher again, Ivana Darcy, and to launch this report, which will form a basis for the future plans. And we're delighted to be able to do that in consultation with the Etwinning community. So thank you very much.
Thank you to Emma Granger there for launching our Etwinning Evaluation report. So the full report is available to read on our website. And as we've just heard from Emma, there's a lot of interesting findings in this. So it's well worth having a look. We'll post a link to the chat to where you can access this. So thank you again to Ivana Darcy for her work on conducting this research.
We'd now like to return to today's theme of media literacy and disinformation. At this time, I'd like to introduce you to Martina Chapman, who will moderate our discussion panel. Martina is coordinator of Media Literacy Ireland, and this is facilitated by the Broadcasting Authority of Ireland. Media Literacy Ireland is an independent association of members committed to the promotion of media literacy across Ireland. So I'll hand you over now to Martina, who will introduce you to our panelists.
Thanks very much, John. I'm delighted to be here this morning and to be joined with 4 great panelists. I think we'll have a great discussion. We're going to spend the next 45 minutes or so talking about media literacy and disinformation. And I think Eileen really set the stage brilliantly for us with her keynote. And I'd like to echo what Eileen said in terms of the language that certainly I'll be using. You know, disinformation is really complex. It's a big and thorny issue. And media literacy is also similarly quite a broad concept. And there's lots of different ways of kind of describing it. So similar to Eileen, I'm going to just use the term media literacy and disinformation as a kind of catch-all for those 2 areas. It'll just keep it simpler, I think. I've got lots of questions for our panelists, but we would love to hear your questions as well. So please do submit your questions using the hop-in system, and I'll do my very best to get to them, but I will make my apologies in advance in case I don't get to everybody's question. So we're going to start off. I'm going to do a quick introduction around the room. We've got Fiona Brosnan and Joanna Moynihan, and they are both transition year students from the Presentation Secondary School in Church Street in Castle Island in County Kerry. And particular thanks to Fiona and Joanna for donning the school uniform and representing the school on a Saturday morning, which seems particularly cruel, but there you go. So thank you for that. And we'll come to, I've got some questions for Joanna and Fiona first. We've also got Conor Gallagher here. Conor's a journalist he's the crime correspondent with the Irish Times. I'm very pleased to have Conor here to give that really important perspective of the journalist. And absolutely not least, is Vicki Malcolm. And Vicki teaches German, French, and European studies at the King's Hospital School in Palmerstown in Dublin. And she was also awarded the eTwinner and eTwinning Ambassador and Erasmus Plus project leader, and is the senior ambassador for the European Parliament Ambassador School Programme. So no better woman, I think, to represent eTwinning and to represent teachers in this discussion as well. So I'm going to come to Fiona and Joanna first. And girls, if you don't mind, I'm going to direct the question at you both, and then you can just decide how to respond yourselves. And the first question I have for you is, you know, we heard Eileen talking about disinformation. Do you think most young people are concerned about false information or about disinformation? And if you do, why do you think that is? Or if you don't, why do you think that is as well? So who wants to? Think somebody might be on mute there. Okay, Joanna is on mute. Joanna, do you want to take?
Is it working?
There we go. Perfect.
Sorry.
Now we go.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So me and Fiona, we don't think that the vast majority of teenagers are overly concerned about disinformation. It's not purposeful ignorance or anything, because every teenager knows it exists and everyone knows it is widespread. But I think every teenager, probably us included, has this little perception in their own heads that they are immune to disinformation, or at least immune to believing it. Like, we all like to think that we're too smart for it.
False information as well. I think sorry.
That's fine. Do you want to add something there, Fiona?
Yeah, sorry. Perfect. I think as well that false information accumulates at such a slow and steady rate that we can barely see the connection between what it is and what it can cause. Over time, it can build up and cause social unrest, and it has done so, but we aren't able to link that back to a 15-second TikTok video, and we aren't able to directly link that back to an immediate effect. So I think the mindset of a lot of teenagers is, I don't believe false information that I see online, but even if I did, it would just be me believing a video on the internet. It's no big deal because there's usually no immediate impact. It's a chain reaction. We don't see the part where it spreads and we can't trace it. And I think that's the problem. I think that's why teenagers aren't as concerned as they should be. It's like some politicians with climate change. Something that isn't affecting us right now doesn't really seem urgent enough to warrant a big change in our behaviour.
Both those points are absolutely spot on. I think most people, irrespective of what age we all are, we all think we're too smart to be affected by disinformation. And I think your analogy there with climate change is really good, because I think it is an issue. It's so big and so sprawling. It feels like it's too big for any one of us on individuals maybe to address. So picking up on that, what do you think when I say we, I mean we as a media literacy community, we as teachers, we as journalists, we as society, what do you think we could do to help young people develop the skills to recognize and to manage disinformation?
So we feel that the most important step that we can take to make teenagers be more cautious of disinformation and its dangers is to make them care. That is something that we have discussed a lot, both in preparation for today and in the WebWise Youth panel. And we've concluded that we need young people to want to develop skills needed to recognise and manage false information in order for them to be effective. So we think the first step has to be spreading awareness on a large scale, not fear-mongering or anything, but show patterns and show facts and show enough evidence that young people are concerned. And once we have young people on board, we have most young people caring about the topic, then we can progress rapidly. Once we set our minds to something as a collective, we are a driving force for change, and this is powerful, and we must take advantage of this while we can. The first initiative that we feel needs to be introduced is earlier intervention. People are starting to get devices younger and younger, so we just feel that plans need to be put in place to prepare them for the future. And going forward, disinformation will affect you both before secondary school, after, all through your life. And teaching 13 and 14-year-olds is not going to cut it anymore. And we need to educate people in primary school about disinformation and its dangers. We need to give them skills to manage information they receive online before they've already begun to practice online habits. One skills method that we recommend is SHEEP. This is an acronym, not the animal. So we just have worked out, I think it's SHEEP, and basically the S stands for source. Obviously check the sources. Is it factual? What's their motive? The next piece is history. Does this news article that you're reading, do they have a history of spreading false or misleading information, or are they reliable? The next one is evidence. Is it realistically, is it factual? You just have to think yourself, does it make sense? Emotion, what are they trying to achieve by putting this out there? What are they trying to achieve through posting this article? If it's false, why would they feel the need to do that? And the last bit is pictures. Pictures, often people find if there's a picture, that means it has to be true. But pictures can be altered, so easy to edit, anything. So just really to be cautious. But that's just a way of just for yourself, just to have it. It just helps you it simplifies it really. Because if you have it all together in one, then you can work out for yourself what's real and what's fake.
That's excellent. I can tell you straight off, I will be using SHEEP in the future. I think that is absolutely brilliant. Did you guys just come up with that as you were preparing for this panel discussion?
Yeah, we were trying to find ways to kind of make it easier to explain.
That's excellent. Well done. Fiona, do you have anything to add there before I move on to the next question?
No, just that it can be used for anything really. Like Joanna has pet sheep, so that was kind of our inspiration. But you could use that from an Instagram post to writing a college essay. Do they rely on emotion to make their piece and history? It's just, I think it's for all ages as well, because sheep is an easy one to remember, I think.
Yeah, and I think having the E in there for emotion is really, really important, because as Eileen was saying, that's a key factor to consider as well. So brilliant. Yes, I'll be in touch with you after that to make sure that, we're able to use that within Media Literacy Ireland. One last question for you before I move on. Eileen talked about disinformation in particular being a kind of a whole of society problem. And bearing that in mind, I'm just curious as to what role you think young people might have in helping other people, whether it's parents or grandparents or maybe even teachers, recognize and manage disinformation.
I think all three of those questions are really symbiotic in a way, because once young people care and once young people are educated, they will spread the information around. It's almost ironic because that was kind of the issue in the first place. So we think that learning from your peers is one of the most effective ways to learn. Secondary schools can link with primary schools to spread awareness on the topic, and there are countless resources available to counteract disinformation. In school ourselves, we've been showing year groups videos by Webwise on the topic. Once people are invested in the issue, they will want to teach others and help others. And nowadays too, it's young people that hold the most knowledge when it comes to technology. With being part of the digital age and all that, it comes naturally, I think. And that's why the skills taught to young people can be taught by young people to their parents and their grandparents. They're simple skills, so not to keep bringing up the sheep, but the sheep, it's not complicated or difficult. And the only disadvantage to using these skills, it takes a bit more time. And that's just the sacrifice we're going to have to make if we want to make disinformation irrelevant.
Another great point. Joanna, do you have anything to add there before I move on to Connor?
No, just agreeing with Fiona. Like, I think if people realise the problem, well, then they can make efforts to change it. The problem at the minute is that a lot of people don't feel like it's directly affecting them, so they aren't overly worried about it. So, I mean, if you just show them proof, show them evidence, or just show them how it relates back to them in their own lives, then, might help them care, make them more aware of it, so that we can progress and kind of put the whole issue of disinformation behind us in life.
Terrific. Fiona and Joanna, thank you very much. I feel inspired this morning having talked to you. So and I have to say, I don't often feel inspired when we're talking about media literacy and disinformation. So thank you very much for that. Connor, that's a hard act to follow, but we're going to come to you next. As a journalist, what concerns you most about the current climate of disinformation, or as sometimes we call it, the information crisis?
I suppose the speed at which it spreads is the most concerning thing. So it's and that's something that's just gotten worse in the last year, I think. That, as a journalist, before you've even put on your shoes in the morning and a story's breaking, there's already misinformation spreading around the internet and spreading around WhatsApp groups hours before you're able to get a story out there online, and many hours before you can get it into the paper. So I suppose, like, just with reference to maybe an example is we had a fatal shooting in late December there of a young black man called George Nkensho in Dublin, and he was shot by the police outside his home. And very quickly, the online debate was about whether the Gardaí were justified in shooting him or not, because he had a knife at the time. And very quickly it went to a racist place as well in some forums. So you had this information spreading around that, for example, that he had lots of previous convictions for violence, and you had fake pictures of injuries he allegedly caused to a shopkeeper prior to the shooting, and those things about the allegations about the previous convictions turned out not to be true at all, and the picture turned out to be related to a completely unconnected event in England of an unconnected victim. But that information was all over the internet before we could even, write a story. So then you're kind of fighting an uphill battle to kind of debunk this information while trying to do your standard reporting. So it becomes quite a time sink as well. I suppose as well, the way disinformation can worm its way into normally intelligent, smart, well-read people, as the girls were saying, we all like to think we're immune to it. But I've been surprised so many times in the last couple of years when I'm you'd be chatting to someone casually and they would bring up this blatantly false information that, I would know well is false, but they wouldn't know it, and they saw it on a Facebook post or a WhatsApp message that's going around and would believe it fully because they trust the person who sent it to them. And sometimes it can be quite hard to convince them that what they're saying isn't true. I think you saw a lot of that in America in the run up to the presidential election, and even after it. You had a lot of people just believing outright nonsense and refused to be dissuaded of any of it, no matter how much evidence there was to the contrary. So yeah, they'd be my main concerns, Martina.
Yeah, it's a very fair point. I mean, I think it was Mark Twain who said, a lie will be halfway around the world before the truth will have its boots on, and it does take so much time to kind of disprove or debunk fake information or disinformation. It's a real challenge. Does that impact how you do your job in any way?
It would impact. I have to say, maybe in the print press, and maybe particularly in the Irish Times, we're slow to change the way anything is done. There's a very there can be a traditional way of doing things, which can be both good and bad. So I think in the media, we have sometimes been very slow to respond to disinformation, and to adapt to kind of fight it. That's changing now to a certain extent. You see a lot more kind of fact checks appearing online from various outlets. You'll see more reactive debunking of information. So, I mean, just to go back to that George in Kent show thing, you, instead of just ignoring the disinformation, we worked on articles debunking it point by point in the hope that they would go some way towards, pushing the disinformation out of the way. Now, how well that worked, I don't know. But so there is more work going into debunking. Probably more again could be done. But I also wonder, and this is just a thought that occurred to me yesterday as I was preparing for this. Newspapers are increasingly behind paywalls, and that has been seen as quite a big success. It seems the future is in when you log into the Irish Times or nearly any other newspaper nowadays, you'll be allowed to read a certain amount of articles, and then you will be asked to subscribe or pay before you can read any more. And that's all well and good, and that pays all of our wages and puts food on the table. But it also leaves a space for disinformation to spread, because the websites that spread false information and extremely partisan information are always going to remain free. So they're always going to get more readers than, the Irish Times or the Irish Independent or whoever. So you're kind of leaving this massive space there. So I do wonder as well whether that's something that the media needs to consider. Now, these are decisions way above my pay grade, thankfully. But, I know the Irish Times does a program where students, third level students, get free subscriptions I wonder if there's a way of even broadening that out to more young people in secondary school, and even maybe up to 25 or something like that, to get them into the habit of referring to trusted news sites rather than just anything else on the internet. And I should also say, though, it'd be really unfair just to demonize young people in this. The biggest culprits for spreading false information in my mind in recent years has been actually older generations. So when we talk about media literacy, and I think Elaine mentioned it in her keynote, it has to be a whole of society thing. And, young people need to be teaching their parents, as the two girls were saying, how to evaluate information and how to find trusted sources, as well as, young people need to learn that themselves.
Yeah, I think that's a key point, the issue of trust. And one of the really insidious things about disinformation is disinformation only needs to sow a seed of doubt. And, whereas trusted information has to work really hard to maintain the level of trust that they have with their readers or viewers or whoever it is. And to pick up on your point there about when content is behind paywalls and some people may not see the value of paying for news or paying for content. And I think there is an element of media literacy there as well. And this does pick up on Eileen's point about media literacy building a better future, because a key part of media literacy is helping people understand how the media works, how it's structured, how it's paid for, how it functions, how editorial processes work. And the idea is if you understand that, then you're in a much better position to be able to make an informed choice about what content you might be prepared to pay for and what content you might not be prepared to pay for. So it is an interesting one. A question I have for you, Conor, is do you think that journalists have any kind of specific role in terms of promoting media literacy? And if you do, then what kind of role is there something journalists could be doing to support it?
I think we have a role, a limited role. I think, the best people to teach media literacy are teachers in the classroom, events like this, and it's discussions that are best had, in a school or education setting as part of, kind of the civics class, the CSPE or whatever the acronym for that class is nowadays. I think when journalists can contribute to that, it's great. But I mean, I'm not sure journalists are too effective in promoting media literacy in a general sense, because we have a vested interest. We want to keep our jobs. We want our newspapers and our media outlets to keep going. So if I'm out here saying, guys, you should only trust the Irish Times, or you should only trust, established newspapers, people are going to be looking at me saying, yeah, that's all well and good, but sure, you would say that, which is fair enough, So I think journalists, though, do have a role. And as you said, being more transparent about how the process works could be very beneficial. Before the pandemic, we would have transition your classes into the paper on a very regular basis, and they would, they'd walk them through the whole process, and they'd sit in on meetings and everything. It was brilliant. More things like that could be great. I think more explanation, and this is something that we could all do better, probably, is more explanation of how you came to your story. So who your sources are, if you're not naming your sources, why specifically are you not naming your sources? There can be an over-reliance sometimes on anonymous sources. In my area of crime, we use anonymous sources a lot, just because of the nature of the job. Gardaí traditionally can't speak on the record about things, so we're forced to. But I think we should explain it more, because just a story based on anonymous sources completely, I feel, is a lot weaker than a story where you can actually name someone. But if you do have to refer to anonymous sources, explain why they are anonymous. And just more, when we get things wrong as well, holding up our hands, because everyone's going to get things wrong. it's about how you respond to it. So if you get things wrong, being quick to clarify it, being quick to own up to your mistake, being quick to apologize, obviously, and being quick to just show how you will not get it wrong in the future.
That's all solid advice, Conor. Thank you very much. Vicki, I'm conscious of time, and I knew 45 minutes would fly, so we'll move on to Vicki now. Vicki, from your perspective as a teacher, how concerned do you think teachers are about the issue of disinformation?
Good morning, everyone. I'd just like to say thank you to Joanna and Fiona. Now, that was really, really super, and I love the sheep idea as well. I think that's something we could all bring into our classrooms. From a teacher perspective, I think fake news has really crept into the classroom. Disinformation has crept into the classroom, and research shows that more than a third of teachers are now seeing this kind of disinformation that has been found online being cited in student work and being used in student discussions in the classroom. So it's quite a disturbing trend. And given now that, especially after 2 bouts of online learning in the last 12 months, we are more reliant than ever on technology in the classroom, on educational technology. Yet many students, I think, still lack the digital literacy necessary to really identify false information. And I would very much agree with the girls when they said that starting a program maybe in transition year, for example, on media literacy or media disinformation is almost too late. That we have to be starting at a much earlier age. I have a 9-year-old daughter, and she's busy at the moment while we're doing this, texting me from the train down to Cork to see her granddad, and she's making TikToks and posting them and to me, and I think, my goodness, she's age 9, so I would really like to see this being grabbed right from primary school all the way through secondary school. I think there's quite a good organization in the States. They're called Common Sense Media. It's a non-profit organization, and they are working to provide kind of trustworthy information for parents and for students. But they did a survey which was relatively recent and very interesting, and that survey said that 44% of young people using teenagers believe they can tell the difference between disinformation or even just misinformation and true stories, yet 30% of those admitted to sharing stories online, and everybody has touched on that this morning. Something that makes you react emotionally. You want to believe it, and therefore you think it's true. So it is having a huge impact, in my opinion, in the classroom.
True. We and I think we definitely saw that in during the pandemic in a time of kind of uncertainty and fear, and it's those kind of emotions that are really, really powerful. In your opinion, or have you seen any evidence of the rise of mis or disinformation having an impact on how students engage with the curriculum or with content in the classroom?
I think what I would be concerned about, and I'm sure Conor probably has a similar view, is that you would almost lose trust, or that students would almost lose trust in what is an authoritative source. That trust is being undermined in the classroom, so they don't know where to go to get good information, to get accurate, true information. And I think that's where we come in, and Conor mentioned it, and he's absolutely right. It needs to be approached in every classroom, in every subject. Where I feel quite strongly is that it's not just taught in isolation. And there are super programs that are available. So there is a whole junior cycle short course on digital media literacy, which is really super. There are brilliant resources from the likes of WebWise, who are running the workshop here today. They are fantastic. The Press Pass workshop today, again, that's another super idea, but it's all aimed at maybe just being taught in isolation, where I think this really needs to be something that we're doing in every class. So we have to develop, we have to help our students become informed citizens, digital citizens. And I think that is has been touched on this morning as to how you might do that. But something as simple as being able to identify red flags when you're looking at something. If you're reading something and the headline is full of exclamation marks and it's in bold type, then you might question whether that is just sensationalist or whether it's going to be true. The way we might look at that in class, for example, in my classroom, is we might do a poll. We might have everybody looking at an article and we might say, right, okay, we're going to have a vote. Do you think this is disinformation? Do you think this is accurate? And then you can discuss why, but that needs to be done on a regular basis. You encourage questioning, I think, as well. You get students to really engage with fact checkers and making sure that they don't automatically assume that the information they have is true, even if it comes from friends or family. In fact, maybe even especially, because if somebody passes it on to you, it doesn't mean it's true. It just means that they maybe would like it to be true. We talked about images earlier. I think the girls were mentioning images earlier, not assuming that every image is genuine. So again, something I might do in the classroom is, we have so much technology available to us now, and so much technology that you can edit images with, that you might say to students, okay, I want you to take an image and I want you to edit it just slightly, and I want you to bring it back to class and show everybody and pass it off as something that is real, and just to get them thinking, oh my goodness, that was a very small change, but now it's fake. It's no longer real. Being aware of bias, sharing your stories in classroom is really important, and that idea of gauging your emotional reaction. So there's a lot that we could do. But I think the biggest thing, and definitely Eileen mentioned this very clearly in her keynote speech, is that we support open and collaborative learning environments, that we've got diversity in our classrooms, that we've got questioning in our classrooms, that we have discussion communities, and that we have a really broad kind of cross-curricular approach to media disinformation and also to media literacy.
Yeah, all very fair points. Just while you were speaking there, it reminded me of a quote I heard recently about media literacy, and that media literacy, or certainly part of media literacy, was developing the skill to be skeptical about information and content, but not to become cynical, because that's when you kind of start to run into difficulties. And we've heard that the development of critical thinking skills is part, but only part, of the solution to the misinformation crisis. It's absolutely not a silver bullet. And you were talking about some really good examples of resources there, and I'm just interested do you think there are enough resources available and support available to teachers in this area, especially in relation to developing those critical thinking skills?
Yes, I mean, I think they are ever increasing. So, WebWise is a fantastic source because they have, it's not just their own resources, but they have links to other resources that you can use in your classroom. I suppose my feeling would just be that we as teachers, we need to be doing this on an ongoing basis and not in isolation. And I think we're quite reliant on technology now, particularly in the last 12 months. And you might almost want to take a technology detox approach in the classroom now and again. And that way, then you're cultivating judgment and perspective in your students when you're not always relying on the technology, when you're relying on teasing out ideas and discussion. So I think there could be more resources, most certainly, but I think those resources will come. And with the great work that students like Joanna and Fiona are doing, and getting that message out to their peers, that's the way to go about it, spreading the word. Absolutely fantastic. And so when we had Safer Internet Day, which I'm sure the girls were involved in, there are a lot of initiatives that come off the back of that, that allow students to make those judgments for themselves, and it becomes more of a whole school initiative. So I think word is spreading, and it will continue to do so.
Well, the idea of secondary school students working with primary school kids is getting support from the audience. There's a note in here to say, love the idea of secondary school students working with primary school kids. Teenagers are a wealth of knowledge on new digital apps and tools. teachers and parents can learn a lot from them. So there's support for your idea, Joanna and Fiona. Vicki, we've been focused on misinformation and disinformation in this discussion, but I want to talk about media literacy in that broader sense for a minute. Eileen said that media literacy was a way to build a better future. And, it covers so many different areas that are of real importance for us at the moment. How well do you think media literacy as a concept in that broad sense is understood within schools? And if there's more work to be done there, what do you suggest?
It's at the moment, I think it is down to individual teachers. So this is purely a personal opinion, but I would like to see a situation where it becomes much more embedded in school culture. And there are schools who are doing wonderful work and who are real digital champions. And then there are other schools who aren't. And that's not to make any judgment against those schools. It's just the way things are. I think it was Emma actually, when she was talking about launching the Etwinning report, was talking about how Etwinning, has been maybe a bit of a slow burn because teachers find that they just don't have time to do it. And time will come up over and over again whenever you are trying to introduce new initiatives like that. People feel that there's no time in an already very hectic schedule to do this. So being involved with Etwinning and being involved with EPAS, with the European Ambassador School Programme, has been a really good way for me to introduce media literacy into this room, because with every Etwinning by its very nature is online, and therefore students are we are all obliged as part of an Etwinning project to make them aware of dangers of online or of net safety, let's say. But also I think just by the nature of the way they're working and collaborating with their peers in other countries, they are automatically getting a broader perspective, a wider view of a situation, and getting outside of their bubble in school and learning how to make judgment and have a broader perspective. So projects like this are absolutely the way forward.
Good stuff. Okay, thank you very much. Eileen also noted, she quoted Paul Meuhalidus and his description of media literacy as about preparing young people for lives of active inquiry around media. And, it just made me think, where are young people developing those skills? Is it in school? Is it among themselves? And again, coming back to this idea that disinformation is a whole of society problem. What should we be collectively doing? Because I think your point about teachers and the time pressure that teachers are under, and whenever we think about young people, we think, we'll fix that through the schools and we'll just push that out through the schools, but there is a limited resource there as well. So, in terms of trying to become more creative about how we approach this, I'm just wondering if you've got any thoughts on that.
Well, I think these kind of projects, as I said, that's where I would be aiming students, that everybody, and the beauty of Etwinning is that it goes right from primary all the way up, and so that you can add an element of media literacy to any kind of a project that you're working on. But I would be really interested to hear from Joanna and Fiona where they think that they are learning, because from the other side of the fence, how they feel that it's being taught in schools. I think that would be very interesting to hear.
Good. We're almost out of time. Thank you very much for your questions. I'm going to open it up for the last couple of minutes, just if any of you have any final comments. And maybe Fiona and Joanna, if you've got a response to Vicki there as well. So do you have any thoughts on Vicki's last point there about, where do you feel you're getting most of your kind of media literacy information or training from? Joanna, there you go.
Yeah, sorry. I think really just programs in school, workshops. WebWise has been absolutely great this year. We've learned so much in the past year just from even just bringing it up in conversation, just having a conversation about it. because it's not a topic that's avoided, but like it's not a priority in a lot of people's heads. So just even bringing it up in conversation, talking about it in classes, like there's so many things that you can do, but I really think just having conversations about it, that's the best thing that you can do. Because you learn from other people, like you learn from your friends, teachers, everyone. So just talking about it is really the best way, I think, to spread awareness and to learn about it.
Great stuff. Thank you very much, Joanna. Connor, do you have any closing comments there? Anything you want to add?
I suppose just one thing that occurred to me while I was listening to the girls is the spread of misinformation on social media apps that we don't use. So when I was in college, we just about had Bebo, which would be ancient history at this stage. Then we had Facebook. And then, as I got older, the apps seemed to be getting stranger and stranger. So now it's, Instagram, then Snapchat, then TikTok, and I'd be one of the younger people maybe in my workplace, but, don't use them and don't know how to use them. So I worry about the misinformation that's spread without us even seeing it. So I think that's just from the point of view of a journalist, that's something that we need to educate ourselves better about as well. So maybe we should be taking some lessons from Fiona and Joanna as well.
Okay. Thanks very much, Connor. It sounds like Fiona and Joanna are going to have a lot of work ahead of them. I think we're all looking for guidance. And based on their development of the sheep model, I think we're in safe hands there. Vicki, have you any closing comments just before we close off the discussion for the day?
No, I think I completely agree with the girls that opening a space that is safe for discussion on this and making sure that, again, that it's not just something you do to tick a box, that it's not just, okay, we've talked about media literacy and disinformation, that it's an ongoing conversation. That's the most important thing you can do to keep it in always at the very top of people's consciousness.
Yeah, I think so. The only thing left for me to say, I think, is a sincere thank you. Thank you for it's so good to get the three different perspectives here this morning. So sincere thanks to you all for your great contributions. And I think we are finishing up 90 seconds early, but I'm sure John won't mind because you're all going to get prepared now to go into your workshops. Which are going to be excellent. So thank you all very much, and I will hand back to John now.
Thank you so much there to Martina Chapman for moderating our panel discussion. Such an interesting discussion. It's been great to hear the range of perspectives from all our different panelists. So thanks again to everyone who participated in the conversation. So thanks to Martina Chapman, Vicki Malcolm, Joanna Ellen, Fiona Brosnan, and Connor Gallagher. So just before we go on our break, I'll pass you over to John, who'll talk you through the workshops.
Thanks, Ciara. I just again to say thanks to the panel as well. It was such a informative and a really inspiring chat there, and I'm absolutely in awe of some of the input there.
So we'll close the session now. So thank you all so much for coming to our very first Etwinning National Conference. So we hope this has inspired you to go off and create your own Etwinning projects on this theme of media literacy and disinformation. So if you have any questions at all, please reach out to us. You can pop a question in the chat there or send us an email after this. So thank you again. We hope you enjoy your workshops, and thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you. Bye-bye.